So it's a family service. I'm going to try and involve different ones, so don't fall asleep. Title of my message is Blowing It. Peter denies or disowns Jesus. Let's see if technology works. Yeah. So this is what I'm going to go through. My outline, I'm going to recap on the previous three preachers and then come to my introduction. Then I have a main text, which is, of course, Peter disowning Jesus. Then I'll go into some of the background on Peter. He's a very interesting guy. Some of the scriptures that tell us about his character and how God used him. Then I'm going to ask you, maybe, for some examples from the Bible. I have my own list, and I'm going to ask you, maybe you have the same, maybe you have different ones. If there's time, I'll share some of my own experiences, and then I have some closing thoughts. So let's recap. Your attitude will determine your altitude. You've heard this. This is the fourth time, actually, you're hearing this. Last week, Samuela was preaching about, her title was Chaos, Paul and Silas in Prison. We heard about that and how God still, of course, was faithful and could use Paul and Silas, no matter their circumstances and the chaos that was surrounding them. Unbelievable. The week before that, Lillian, about demands and complaints, Moses and the Israelites. You remember? Murmur, complaining. And I know since that sermon, none of you have done any complaining at all. Right? Great sermon. Then the one before that, we heard Stephen about pressures. 3 men and a furnace. You remember those 3 guys? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow down to the image of Nebuchadnezzar, the king there. They refused because it went against their beliefs. So all those 3 items there, chaos, demands and complaints and pressures. We've looked at all those and how our attitude should be, and also how our attitude shouldn't be. It's also important to be honest and say, sometimes we blow it. We all blow it at times in our life. We've all said and done things which we wish we hadn't. So what I'm going to do is ask, is there anybody here who's never, ever blown it? You've never made a mistake. You've never fallen short of the mark. You've never missed an opportunity. Anybody here who's perfect? John? Let's be honest. We've all blown it. We've all blown it. I've blown it. I blew it yesterday. Instead of preparing this sermon, I was out in the garden. Beautiful summer's day yesterday. So I blew it. Should have prepared longer. Should have spent more time preparing this sermon. But no problem. I repented. Let's see what God does. We all blow it. Sometimes the consequences, they're serious. Yeah? They could be costly. So you could really blow it. You could really blow it for yourself. You could think you've blown it for God. You could miss an opportunity. God was waiting to use you right there and then, and you missed the mark. Other occasions can be serious. Things we do, things we say. We're all imperfect. So what is our attitude afterwards? Do we lie down defeated, licking our wounds, blame other people, blame God? Or do we repent and move on? I hope it's the latter. We should be honest, go to our Creator, our Maker, repent sincerely, and move on. God is our refuge and strength, and He longs to restore us. That's his business. He's in the business of restoration. In the Bible, there's 1,188 verses. And apparently, the middle verse in the Bible is Psalm 118, verse 8. You can check it out. I don't know, but that's it. 1,188 verses in the Bible. The central verse in the Bible, Psalm 118, verse 8, where it says, God is our refuge. God is our refuge. We are imperfect, but God is perfect. God is perfect. Of course, we're going to blow it. We're going to blow it just like Peter. Peter disowns Jesus. Let's get all this up. Wow, this is small. Now, I would like a volunteer, ideally somebody young, to play the part of Jesus. Somebody with a strong voice, somebody who can give this some emotion, because I'm going to read all of it except that which is in the red. The part that's in the red is Peter. So I'll read the black and you read the red. And I want you know the story, of course, about Peter. As it goes on, you get louder and louder. So the first time you just speak normally, then a bit louder the second time, and the final time you really shout. Are you ready? Make your dad proud. Peter disowns Jesus. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You also were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all.
I don't know that you are talking about,
he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath.
I don't know the man.
After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them. Don't swear.
I don't know the man.
Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Thank you, Peter. Give Peter a round of applause. Thank you, Peter. What a story. Peter was close to Jesus, very involved with Jesus. How on earth could he blow it? How could this man blow it? But we know Peter had a disease. You know what the disease was? Foot and mouth. He had a habit of putting his foot in his mouth. Anybody like that here? He was impulsive, emotional, impetuous. That means he was rash. He did things out of emotion instead of reason, from the head and not the heart. He said and did things and then regretted them. We know the story when Jesus predicted his death. Peter took Jesus aside and rebuked him. Peter rebuked Jesus. He didn't want him, of course, to be taken to his death. And then Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan. To Peter. Strong words. Poor Peter. I think most of us would have done the same. We also, had we been with Jesus all those years, we wouldn't want him to die. We wouldn't want his life to be taken. We would have taken Jesus aside and said, no, we will not let this happen. Peter does it. But, of course, he's rebuked because he's going against God's plan, God's will for Jesus. He had to be taken. He had to be arrested. He had to be on trial and put to death. Then we know earlier, Peter tried to stop Jesus from washing his feet. That's in the book of John, chapter 13, verse 8. Jesus was going to wash Peter's feet, but Peter said, no, I won't let you do this. Again, jumping the gun, blowing it. This was Jesus in charge, not Peter. But Peter thought Jesus wasn't in charge. Peter thought he knew better. And then we all know this great story in the Garden of Gethsemane with the high priest's servant. What did Peter do? Cut off the ear with his sword. Of course, he was defending Jesus. He thought he was doing the right thing. But actually, he blew it. But we know Jesus healed the high priest's servant there, and the ear was restored. So I was thinking, really, for Peter, it's really out of weakness. It's out of weakness, not wickedness. That was his weakness. Impetuous, impulsive. He thought he knew better than Jesus. But it was out of a good intention. But it was wrong. It was not part of God's plan. Not what Jesus wanted. So out of weakness, not wickedness. Important to remember that. God had a plan for Peter, so as I've said, he had his weaknesses. He was boastful and putting his foot in his mouth. He probably wished the ground would swallow him up when he came out with those statements. But Peter, we know, had a special connection, special relationship with Jesus. He was on the inner circle together with John and James. Often with Jesus at those important times. You know who's there on the mountaintop with the transfiguration. Peter was on the inner circle. God had a plan. God could use Peter, no matter. And we know Peter was reinstated by Jesus. Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" Why 3 times? Because he denied him 3 times. He had to balance that out. And it's a play on words. Peter responds, "You know I love you, Jesus." But it's only the 3rd time that he really uses the right word and says, "I do love you, Jesus." And after his resurrection, this was interesting, I didn't realize this. Jesus told Mary, "Go and tell my disciples and Peter." Peter wasn't just a regular disciple. He was more than that. He was special. Again, God working out his plans through Peter, no matter how many times he blew it. And then we know in the New Testament, Peter was mightily used. We know in the book of Acts about the great sermons where thousands were added daily. This is Peter, the weak guy, the one who was blowing it, but God was using him mightily, reaching thousands, preaching great sermons. He was also imprisoned at one point, but the angels opened the prison gates for Peter. God again working out his plans through a weak man, a failure, a guy always blowing it. God can work through us. And actually it was Peter who led the first Gentiles to the Lord. One of those was Cornelia in Antioch. So he was responsible for really making a breakthrough there and reaching not just the Jews, but the Gentiles. We can learn from his example. We can all remember when we've blown it. We can all remember when we've put our foot in it, when we've missed opportunities, where God has presented divine opportunities perhaps for us, and we've missed the mark. We've missed out. We didn't use the opportunity. But what do? Do we lie down and lick our wounds? Nope. We have to get up, respond, go to our Maker, repent, and move on. And we can take courage and inspiration from different ones in the Bible who've done that. Now I'm going to involve you guys a little bit. I want you to shout out any of the biblical characters who blew it. David. Judas. Samson. Yeah, I guess so. Keep coming. Moses. Jonah. Adam and Eve. Just a small problem there. Adam and Eve, that's where it all started. Any more? Saul. Miriam? You're doing really well. Any more? People who blew it. Paul? We said Saul. Saul became Paul. Come on, keep thinking. Preach to me. Thomas? Who said May? Kay? I can only hear May and Kay. I can't hear, but it doesn't matter. Amazing. A lot of people really blew it. God used many of them because of their attitude. Not all of them had the right attitude. So you shouted your list. Let's see who I had. The battery's gone. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Is that you or me? Biblical characters who blew it. Who said Adam and Eve? Edith. Adam and Eve, how could we forget? Genesis 3, you know the story. Eve blamed the snake, Adam blamed Eve. That's where we are today. It all started there in the Garden of Eden. Judas, somebody said Judas, of course, we know in Matthew 26. He blew it. He realized he'd blown it for 30 pieces of silver, went back, threw the silver, and unfortunately didn't repent. At least, yeah. He took his own life at the end. How about this, the thief on the cross? There's two on the cross. One of them was shouting insults. He blew it. He had the chance. That was his last breath almost. He preferred to shout insults. But we know the other guy on the other side. He didn't blow it. He had blown it. He was rightfully on the cross being crucified. He was a criminal. He was paying the price. But he didn't blow it. He blew it but turned to Jesus, saying he was who he said he was. And we know that he was saved. The right attitude. How about the rich young man? The rich young man came to Jesus with a good attitude, I think, asking Jesus what he should do. What should he do? Jesus came with some very harsh words. Told the rich man he should sell everything he has and give it to the poor. The rich young man, he turned away. We don't hear about him again. So he blew it. He had a confrontation with Jesus, but he didn't do what Jesus asked him to do. Very hard if you're a rich man. And then Abraham, Moses, Jonah, Jacob, David, the list goes on. Some of them, most of them, had the right attitude. Most of them were man enough, strong enough to be sincere and repent. Oh, now it's working again. I'm not sure how much time I have. 5 minutes, maybe? I'll keep it short. Recently, I had the chance to talk with my uncle who was dying. He was dying. This was at Christmas time. I went with my father. This was his brother. And I went with the intention of saying something about Jesus to him, but I didn't. I blew it. But I realized I'd blown it, and I sincerely said to God, I've missed an opportunity. Please, it's out of my hands. I flew back to Denmark and left the situation. What more could I do? I had blown it. I really wanted to say something to him. I wanted to tell my uncle. I said, I know where I'm going, and I want to see you there. That's what I wanted to say. I missed the mark. I blew it. But so I had to pick myself up and move on. The situation's out of my hands. Then unfortunately, my uncle died. I wanted to, of course, speak to him before he died. Didn't get the opportunity, but next time I was in England was, of course, at his funeral. I don't know where he was at the end, but the minister had something very interesting to say, who was taking the funeral. He said, we don't know if Philip, my uncle, was for God, but we know God was for Philip. I thought that was nice. It's out of our hands. We can't change what's done, but we know something. God is for people. God was for my uncle. He reached out, and I can only hope and trust that I'll see my uncle one day in heaven. Other times when I've blown it, I remember once I was taking an exam. I missed the most important part of this question. I answered the question, a long essay, and when I finished, I realized I'd blown it. I'd missed the point. I'd missed one important factor, and I'd written pages and pages of rubbish. You know the scene with Mr. Bean when he's taking an exam? Mr. Bean goes to an exam. The exam starts. He takes out a paper from the envelope and begins the exam. It's not what he was expecting. He's going crazy. He's panicking. The hours, 2 hours, 3 hours go by. Just 10 minutes before the end, the man taking the exam in charge says, those of you who took out the green paper, and those of you who took out the yellow paper. Mr. Bean had only taken out the green paper, but there was a yellow paper in the envelope where his expertise was there. Mr. Bean could have answered the right questions, but he blew it because he took the wrong paper. And it was the same with me. I missed the point. I misread the question to this exam. I blew it. I felt so stupid. And all my friends, when they were talking, they said they'd done it the way it should have been done. I thought I blew it. Somehow, I got an A. So I don't know. I don't know. But I was down, and I asked God to make it right. I needed that exam. I don't know how, but I got an A. Some closing thoughts. You're still there? Nobody's blown it? We'll blow it at some point. It's our attitude afterwards that's important. God is in the business of restoration. Turn to your Maker. Turn to your neighbor and say, turn to your Maker. You know, when your car breaks down, you don't take it to the vet or the dentist. What do? Take it to the Maker. You take it to the place where they know the car. The place where they know the car. The Creator, the Maker, the experts. God is in the business of restoration. Don't turn to other people. Don't look at your failures. Go to your Maker. Be sincere. Tell him you've blown it. He will use you. He will use you. God can work with anyone, including you. You only have to ask for forgiveness when you've blown it. One of my favorite films is called The Killing Fields. The Killing Fields. It's about the war in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge who killed millions of people. And there's two characters in that film, a Cambodian journalist and an American journalist. They're very close, like blood brothers. They get separated. And the Cambodian guy, Dith Pran, he's on his own. His family are killed. He loses everything he has. And he's in a labor camp. But he escapes from this labor camp. And he finds his way miraculously to the border with Thailand. And he finds, after going through these killing fields where he sees dead bodies and all sorts of chaos and mayhem and unspeakable things in Cambodia, he makes it to safety in a Red Cross center on the border with Thailand. And the American journalist finds out, can't believe this, after years and years, the American journalist finds out that his friend is in this Red Cross refugee camp. And he goes to meet him. These are blood brothers, you've got to remember that. They're so close. And in the American Sydney, his heart is broken because he thinks he'll never see his friend Dith Pran again. But he gets this chance, he gets this news that he's in this refugee camp. And he goes to meet him. And a servant goes to fetch Dith Pran, who also thinks he's never going to see his friend Sydney again. But they're reunited. It's a fantastic scene. And Sydney, the American, says to Dith Pran, "Do you forgive me?" And Dith Pran says, "There is nothing to forgive." His attitude was enough. Sydney had done everything to go out of his way to make it right with his blood brother in Cambodia. He went all that way to Thailand to meet him. He says, "Do you forgive me?" And Dith Pran says, "There is nothing to forgive." That's how it is with God. Sometimes he knows from your attitude. He knows you're sincere. And he'll say to you, there's nothing to forgive because it's clean. You blew it, but you had the right attitude afterwards. I hope that's the same for you. When you blow it, you may even blow it today. You may even blow it today, this week. Don't lie there licking your wounds, but be honest. Be honest with God. Tell him you blew it. Tell him you've fallen short. Tell him you've made a mistake. Tell him you need him. You need him as your refuge. Remember that, the central verse in the Bible. God is our refuge. Go to your Maker. Go to your Creator. We all blew it. We're going to blow it. But let's have the right attitude. Let's have the biblical attitude. Let our response be a godly one.
It's a journey that we take together. It's soul food from the heart. In God, we're united in our differences. It's a place of getting in touch with God, others, and your destiny. Come and visit ICC, the international Christian community, a church where great things come together.